Discussion after each paper.
Okay. I'm very happy, thank you everyone, I'm very happy to be the chair of the first session, which is on a very interesting topic. On Socrates and the emotions. I'm glad to introduce the first speaker. Well, none of the speakers need any introduction, but yet Margalit Finkelberg is coming from Tel Aviv University, where she's emerita, and Israel Academy for Sciences and Humanities. She is the author of To Use the Epicurean Expression concerning the number of shapes of atoms, unimaginably many papers on various subjects, including Homer and Greek epic and many other topics related to the field. She's also the author of an important book on Plato. And today she's going to speak about the daimon in Socrates, and the title of her presentation is Socrates, Daimonion, and Plato's Psychological Vocabulary. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a 25 minutes presentation, and then the discussion after each paper. So thank you very much.
So, good morning. It's a pleasure and honor for me to open this special meeting at the time, as was already mentioned before, at the time of war, and still we held our annual meeting, and attendance was good. And of course, I like everyone else, I want to thank the organizers, but in my specific case, I also want to thank Professor Gabriel Danzig, who invited me, who actually organized this session and invited me to speak, and this is how this paper actually appeared. So on Socrates' daimonion. It is a matter of common knowledge that Plato and Xenophon, our two main sources on Socrates' divine voice, present two different versions of the daimonion. While Plato sees its function as apotroptic, that is, as prohibiting prohibiting from acting in a certain way, Xenophon does not exclude the possibility that the daimonion could also offer advice about the best course of action. Furthermore, while in Plato the daimonion's admonitions only concern Socrates himself, in Xenophon they relate to both Socrates and other persons. This is neatly illustrated by the following passage of the Memorabilia, number one, the handout. Is there a handout?
Yes.
Okay. Any part?
אני אראה את זה
כשאני אומרת מספר, אוקיי. אז number one. Anyway, I quote many of his companions were counseled by him to do this or not to do that in accordance with the warnings of the daimonion. And those who followed his advice prospered, and those who rejected it had cause for regret. The most significant point of difference is, however, one transpiring from Xenophon's apology, number 2, on the handout, quote again. I have revealed to many of my friends the counsels which God has given me, and in no instance has even shown I was mistaken. As distinct from Plato, who never refers to daimonion as theos, Xenophon explicitly identifies it in this way both here and elsewhere. Moreover, Xenophon Socrates unequivocally puts his communication with the daimonion on a par with divination and prophecy. Number 3, handout, and I don't quote. Understand. Nothing could be more different from what we find in Plato. As Gabriel put it, quote, this use of the daimonion as an occult prognosticator never encountered in Plato occurs repeatedly in Xenophon. We see the daimonion functioning in this way again in the pseudo-Platonic Sharon. As distinct from this, at least on one occasion, Plato explicitly associates Socrates' divine voice with the soul. I know the famous passage in the Phobos in which the daimonion stopped Socrates from crossing the Irissus with the intention of leaving the place where he and Phobos conversed about love. Number 4, quote. In fact, the soul too, my friend, is itself somewhat prophetic, mantiquoti, Socrates remarks. That's why, almost from the beginning of my speech, something disturbed me. Note that either version is thoroughly consistent. Namely, if the daimonion is an external agent as Theos most certainly is, his advice may well concern not only the direct recipient of the message, but also the other persons. When construed in this way, Socrates' interaction with the daimonion becomes a form of prophecy, and this is exactly what we find in Xenophon. If, on the other hand, as Plato seems to imply, the divine voice comes from within, it can only represent Socrates' own psychological condition. The two versions are incompatible, and the fact that both belong to those who were not only personally acquainted with Socrates, but also positioned themselves as his disciples, makes the situation even more partial. Interestingly, it is Xenophon's rather than Plato's version that finds support in Socratic tradition. Thus, in the spurious Alcibiades one, the daimonion is not only referred to as God, but also acts as both an apotheotic and proteotic agent. Number 5 on the handout. Pseudo-Platonic theories also concurs with Xenophon in that it not only repeatedly refers to the daimonion as God, but also holds that its warnings concern both Socrates and other persons. It even adduces several anecdotes to this effect. Judging by the fact that these and similar anecdotes also emerge in later literature, notably Cicero and Plutarch, and that Cicero, after relating some of them, sends the reader to a certain Antipater, who, quote, has gathered a mass of remarkable premonitions received by Socrates, unquote, it would be hard to avoid the conclusion that it is Xenophon's version of the daimonion that was the mainstream one. This will warrant examining Plato's deviating version more fully. In the majority of cases, Plato describes the activity of the daimonion in general terms. Number 6. The daimonion prevents, apotropy, forbids, apocolui, opposes, anantiute, does not allow Socrates to do something. Its apotroptic function is taken for granted to such a degree that sometimes the daimonion simply appears, and this is enough to check Socrates' impulse to act in a certain way. Number 7. Sometimes, however, the daimonion stopping Socrates in the middle of doing something is rendered in more specific terms, and this allows us better to understand the manner in which Plato perceived its function. Number 8. Thus, in the Apology, Socrates says that on many occasions the daimonion restrained him in the middle of a speech, and in the Phobos that it always holds him back from something he is about to do. Both epecho and episco, the words Plato uses on these two occasions, mean to restrain, to hold back, alongside the obvious usages. That is, such as, for example, restraining a horse. Greek literary tradition, since Homer, employed these verbs and their cognates ischo and katecho for the description of self-restraint and control over emotions, especially anger. This is equally true of Plato, who frequently uses the verb katecho for the same purpose. As we shall see immediately, it goes even further than that. In Book 6 of the Republic, Socrates discusses the relations, the reason why the philosophers usually abstain from being involved in politics. Number 10. After having reduced the case of Thales, whose illness acted as a bridle that restrained him from politics, Helenos Oios Etashein, he brings forward the argument already made in the Apology, namely that in his own case it was his divine side, the daimonion semeion, that has prevented him from being engaged in political life and actually say, thank you for that. The daimonion, therefore, is envisaged here as analogous to halenos, a word whose meaning is both bridle and bit, and that at some point in Socrates' life, it restrained his political ambitions and thus allowed him to obtain his mind just as the other had done. Note that in the final analysis, the philosopher's choice is presented as made through the agency of reason, logismos. The widespread expression unbridled mouth attests using equestrian imagery in the context of self-restraint and control of speech and emotions is not unusual in Greek literary tradition. Number 11. Quote, she does not know how to bear the bridle, Clytemnestra says about Cassandra in Aeschylus' Agamemnon. Whereas in Sophocles' Trachiniae, the young and impassioned Hyllus is admonished to bite his mouth in restraint. This Xenophon Thomason. Several decades later, the same expression will be used both literally and metaphorically in the Hyllus description of the bad horse, the one that stands for the irrational heart and soul. Still later, the verb Heleno to bridle will perform the same task. The activity of the daimonion is thus firmly placed by Plato within the context of the discourse of self-restraint, virtue designated in the philosophical literature by the term enkrateia, self-control. Playing a central role in Xenophon's portrayal of Socrates, enkrateia is conspicuous by its absence in Plato's characterization of Socrates' behavior. Would it be that the daimonion, consistently presented by Plato as checking Socrates' impulses to act, was envisaged by him as a special form of encryption? To clarify this issue, let us turn to the tripartite division of the soul in the public and the Phobos, the two dialogues that allow us to place the daimonion within the context of Plato's doctrine. It is important to keep in mind in this connection that the partition of the soul in Book 4 of the Republic is framed by a discussion of the virtue of temperance, of Fortuna, number 12. Socrates defines temperance as, quote, a kind of order, cosmos, and control, and criteria of certain pleasures and desires. Later on, the terms harmony, harmonia, consonance, symphonia, and accord, harmonia are used for conveying same meaning. The definition is part of the prelude to the discussion of the tripartite division of the soul. Let us follow it step by step. Playing on the etymology of the word enkratia, Socrates starts with the soul's division into two parts, which closely resembles the traditional discourse of self-discovery. Number 13, quote, the expression that, to be creator or to that is to master ourselves, is apparently trying to indicate that in the soul of that very person, there is a better part and the worst one, and that whenever the naturally better part is in control of the worst, this is expressed by saying that the person is self-controlled or master of himself. And the part of the soul to be controlled is formed by desires and appetites, epithumia, best represented by thirst and hunger. Using a vocabulary closely similar to that applied elsewhere to the daimonion, Socrates defines the rational part of the soul as that which forbids. Number 14, quote, isn't that there is something in their soul begin to clever them to drink, and something different forbidding to pollute them to do so, that overall cartoon the thing that beats, doesn't that which forbids in such cases appears whenever it appears, through the agency of reason, logismos, while what drives and drags them to drink emerges as a byproduct of passions and diseases. Not only to collude that which forbids, used twice in this passage for designating the rational part of the soul, is practically identical to apocolluere, designating the activities of the daimonion in the theaetetus. Its ability sporadically to appear is rendered by the same verb and dignomite as in the descriptions of daimonions visitation in the Phobos and the Phobos. It's number 7. Furthermore, the factor that restrains the soul from indulging in desires and appetites is designated by the same term logismos, reason, as the one that acts in Republic 6 as equivalent to Socrates' daimonion, in that it is instrumental in bridling political ambitions of philosophy. After having defined the forbidden part as the rational to logisticon, as one represented by desires and appetites, as appetitive to epithematicon, Socrates argues that there should also be a third part, which he calls the spirited, to symbolides. Responsible for emotions such as anger, it is closer to the rational part in that it unquestioningly obeys its commands and willingly cooperates with it. Restraining his barking hat in Odyssey 20 serves as an illustration. Its role is that of mediator like a shepherd ruling over his flocks is assisted by dogs, so also the rational part of the soul is assisted by the spirit part, which helps it to rule over appetites and desires. A courageous man, Andreas, is the one whose spirited part follows the orders of the rational part as to what is to be feared and what is not. And a wise man, of course, is one who follows what is ordered to him by the rational part, which possesses the knowledge of what is advantageous for each part and for the whole soul, which is the community of all parts. Like the daimonion, the rational part gives orders, parangelion, following which one would sustain harmony within the soul with no need of being forcibly restrained by the rational part. This is what the state of temperance also fully amounts to. Number 15, quote. And isn't he temperate, Socrates, because of the friendly and harmonious relations between these same parts? Namely, when the ruler and the ruled agree that the rational part to logisticon should rule and dealing rebel against it. End quote. The discussion of the partition of the soul thus begins and ends with a definition of the well-balanced soul of one who has achieved this state of sophrosophy. The closely similar message is communicated in metaphorical form in the physics. In this dialogue, Plato lavishly exploits the equestrian imagery, which, as we saw, had been frequently used in the literature for the representation of space. Socrates compares the soul to a unit consisting of a team of horses and their charioteer. While in the case of goats, both the horses and the charioteer are good, and there is harmony between them. In the case of the mortals, there is a mixture, so that the charioteer has to exercise his authority over the ruler, or alpha. Just as to the logisticon of the Republic does. Number 16. While the good horse is obedient to verbal orders and restrains itself, from following its sex drive hence to the pressure of shame. In the case of the bad one, it is only the charioteer's cholinos, whose meaning here is bit, that manages to keep it under control. Note that in both the Republic and the Phaedrus, Plato makes provision for two states of the soul. In one case, the lower parts of the soul rebel or literally lead a civil war, stasiadisi, against the upper one, a situation that demands the application of strong, sometimes even violent measures of restraint. This is the soul's normal condition. In the other case, the parts of the soul are in accord with each other and require only gentle guidance by the rational part to sustain this state. This is the case of the souls which, being closer to the gods, have the greatest share of the divine. Unsurprisingly, the first among such privileged souls is the soul of the gods. In the philosopher's soul, the self-control and criteria, which normally issues from a tension between the upper and the lower parts of the soul, takes the form of an inner harmony and unconditional compliance with the prescriptions of the rational part. A state of the soul which is defined as sophrosophy. To put it in Plato's own words, number 8. But you meet the desires that are simple, measured, and directed by reason, logismos, in accordance with understanding and correct belief, only in the few people who are born with the best natures and receive the best. and forth. Everything points in the direction that Socrates' interaction with the daimonion is constructed along the same line. Conclusion. It is generally assumed that of the two alternative versions of Socrates' daimonion, as offered by Plato and Xenophon, it is Plato's version, the one that locates the daimonion within Socrates' soul, that should be regarded as more reliable. As I hope to have shown, the opposite would rather be true. Having placed Socrates' daimonion within the context of the traditional discourse of self-esteem, Plato molded it to fit his own doctrine of the soul. This kind of appropriation is characteristic of Plato's general strategy of presenting the tenets of other philosophers, included, through the prism of his own perception of them. His highly idiosyncratic reading of Protagoras' truth in the Theaetetus being a prime example. In other words, what Plato offers us is not so much Socrates' daimonion as such, but rather his own interpretation of it. No such strategy is attested in the case of Xenophon or the other alternative sources discussed above. The charge made against Socrates at his trial, namely that, quote, he does not recognize the gods the state recognizes, but rather other new divinities, end quote, supposing as it does supporting as it does Xenophon's presentation of the daimonion as a god and therefore as an external rather than internal factor, going in the same direction. Very much.
Thank you very much. So we are ready to take questions from the audience.
Well, first of all, I agree with you.
Thank you.
I have two examples. One, at the end of the apology, he says that he's sure that death is not really a problem because the daimonion hasn't objected to his coming there together. How do you explain this as something internal? He's trying, if the daimonion is something internal, how does that tell him whether, all that can tell him is whether he thinks that's good or bad, not whether it really is. That's my question. And my second question was something I was surprised by, so good that I haven't read it, I was surprised by the quote from the Alcibiades, the daimonion always prevents me from that, but now he has set me on at Fake. Here's the daimonion telling him to do something positive, which every other source says he never does. What's going on?
Okay. I start with your second question. Actually, I don't believe that Alcibiades one is by Plato. You know that, and as far as I know, this is one of the reasons why this dialogue it confirms that it is not by Plato, but actually, I think that Alcibiades is still by there are other reasons in the former, and so you can disagree, but I don't see this. And as to your first question, I think what he felt was a kind of peace of mind. The daimonion, if I understood you correctly,
he seems to be taking it as a sign coming from as the science comes beyond him, not just saying,
No.
"Oh, I'm not bothered by it." The fact that the daimonion interfered with me,
No,
it should interject to me. I take it as a sign that there's nothing wrong.
yes, because nothing. I think he felt a peace of mind. It's not like in the Phobos, for example, that something troubled him, and he turned back. In this case, nothing troubled him, and he took it as a sign that everything is. In Plato's interpretation, if you take Plato's interpretation, because I think Gabriel also say about it, but what Socrates really thought about this daimonion, if we follow the line of Xenophon and other sources, okay, it may be historically God was silent. But I think that Plato was very consistent in reading the daimonion, and he simply interpreted it that peace of mind. I have no term for it. And he told that it is good to die. This is what and this is what he actually said. Death is a good issue for the philosophy.
May I interject one thing? I think that's a fine explanation, really. But if David is not happy with it, he could suppose that this is a incident that Plato had a difficulty assimilating to his model, and it therefore offers further evidence that the other model was more historically accurate. That's another possibility.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to say about that case one. Because said there that he was for many years in love. It was answered by the daimonion from both and the other love. And now we could say that when he said that he was good by the daimonion, actually means that the daimonion no longer has infatuation of yes.
But still, he returned to which is very unpathologized, and it is a very active action, urgent, exactly as, for example, Homeric gods do. And the statement represents both apoplectic and apoplectic function. So, thank you.
I just wanted to add something with Gabriel said about Plato's Margalit to remain consistent with his own retreat or model, taking legitimate. He is really picture daimonion experience with Socrates, and there is a very vivid picture of the visitation. So sometimes there's no choice like for me, social loyal to it. That is college, quote unquote, but on the other hand, things somehow contradict the theory of mind. So on other cases, that is to harmonize the real visitation with
So what we had to adjust if I write and this interpretation was actually a falsification. Although I would not describe the such strong interpretation, there was not something usual. It's in its voice. It's voice which is easily interpreted as an inverse, appear, image, genital. He uses a word which is very flexible. But yes, I agree with that because he changes the picture in some way. So
We have a question from the Zoom audience.
Yes.
Karen.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Professor Finkelberg.
she's on you.
We can't hear you.
Okay, voila. Okay, we will come back to you when
Okay.
after the- we can hear.
We can-
Maybe you can write down your question and we will read it aloud.
Okay.
Do you hear me now?
And I just wanted to ask, who can be the daimonion is Plato part of isn't it similar to the time? The time.
Actually, I don't know because my perspective is very narrow. I would say because I only examined it and studied it in the Platonic perspective. In Plato, it is, I don't say exactly the same as the Lexicon, but it is certainly, I think there is enough evidence that it is understood along the same lines and perhaps yes, idea. And how you can take it further, I don't know. It's an open question.
Actually, I saw the question. Thank you very much for this really interesting presentation. I was wondering, when you will create or make a correspondence between the logisticon in Plato's Republic form and the function of the daimon, although it matches the calculative aspect of the logisticon in book 4. Because the logisticon in book 4 is not contemplating the ideas, not having a discussion with the God, it's just a part of the soul which makes the best calculus for what's good for the whole soul, but it has a very limited and practical function at this stage of
I
dialogue.
think it fits practical function of the daimonion because it was very customized for Socrates and practical.
And how does it match the evolution in Plato's dialogue between a more monistic psychology, maybe in Ricardo or in the Socratic dialogues, and the more developed theory of the soul that is presented in the Republic, Timaeus, and so forth?
I think there are stages in the theory of the soul and the emotions, and this circle, this tripartite division, it appears only in two dialects. In the Republic, and if you look at more or less, and I know now that there is an argument that the first concept laws that can be interpreted in this way. Otherwise, it is a usual bipartite picture like in Homer. Because in Homer there are also tumors and so.
Thank you.
Mariana's comment?
No,
Should I make a comment?
Yes.
So I also thank Margalit for the brilliant paper and also for sharing it with me prior to this meeting so that I could think about it a little bit more. She brings, as you all have seen, important new insights to an issue that has been debated for hundreds of years, significance of the daimonion, Plato, Xenophon. She shows that in Plato, the daimonion functions as a psychological restraint on action, and she connects this with the relative absence of enkroteia in Plato's psychological theory. Enkroteia in Xenophon and Aristotle is chiefly responsible for controlling the bodily desires, which are not amenable to the direct influence of reason. Margalit argues that the daimonion corresponds to the logistikon, which for Plato is responsible for controlling the bodily desires, either on its own or through the mediation of the thumos. It also seems to go beyond enkroteia in restraining other kinds of behavior as well. Margalit also notes the divergences between Plato and Xenophon on the daimonion. For Plato, the daimonion is a function of the soul, and it plays a purely apotrophic function only for the person concerned. For Xenophon, the daimonion is a divinity, and it plays both apotrophic and protrophic roles for the person who experiences it and for others. She notes that Xenophon's account is closer to the general consensus on the daimonion in antiquity, suggesting that it is a greater claim to historical accuracy. I assume that she is not making a claim about the historical daimonion, but about the way that historical Socrates spoke about it. And this may be correct. The alternative is that each author portrayed Socrates in his own image. I would therefore like to point out that Xenophon had more sympathy for conventional acts of piety than Plato did, and so he was more disposed than Plato to see the daimonion as a divinity. He was more concerned with giving advice about practical matters than was Plato. He thought that philosophy was preferable to the active life, and so he had a good reason to see the daimonion as protrophic. And he was more concerned with doing good for others in practical terms than was Plato. So he had good reason to see it as a source of advice for others. So the divergence also reflects the divergence in interests between these two authors. For both Plato and Xenophon, the divine is responsible for the most important things. But for Plato, the most important things are intellectual or spiritual, while for Xenophon, they are political. So there's a clear parallel between the authors and the daimonions that they describe. If the historical consensus indicates that Xenophon has described the daimonion as Socrates did, that would imply that Socrates shared Xenophon's political orientation. And one final comment, I don't think that we can dismiss the possibility that Xenophon and Socrates used the term daimonion to refer to a naturalistic phenomenon. Xenophon never portrays Socrates' daimonion as predicting the kind of things that only a god would know. His main prophecy, as far as I know, is that Anytus' son will degenerate because of his father's poor educational instruction. This seems to be something that a person with good psychological insight could predict on his own. This suggests that Xenophon and Socrates may be using the term daimonion, although it refers to a divinity, he may still be using it as a cover for a prognostic power of the soul.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for your response. I certainly am not an authority on Xenophon, and I know I think 2,000 more about Xenophon than I do. But actually, and I don't in this historical Socrates felt one way or another, but we have this indictment. Socrates was accused for worshipping other divinities, and it's not Xenophon, it's not it's communist opinion. What So this is how it goes beyond idiosyncratic one thing. And another one is enclave contains of domination. Actually, it was new for me in Xenophon only appetite. His main examples of enclave, this is example, it's anger. He's angry at the behavior of his players, and he's proud of this. So in Plato, I follow Plato's understanding of enclave, and now I'm taking to account but generally speaking, thank you very much for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for your paper.
Thank you. And we have now the paper of Gabriel Danzig from Bar-Ilan University. Gabriel, again, if you don't need any presentation, but still, Gabriel's research focuses a lot on Xenophon and on ethical political aspects also of Xenophon and Plato philosophy. You have an important book on comparison between Xenophon and Plato on Socrates. You make us understand, us from philosophy, understand the importance of Xenophon for Socrates and for Plato's philosophy, so that's important. Your paper today is, the title of your paper is Plato's Protagoras and Xenophon, Socrates, on how to change a person's hexis.
People want to read along with my talk, if you want to. So yeah, put it up on the board, and then if you're spacing out or something, you can catch up. Hold on, let me find my talk. Why did it disappear exactly now? I can read over there. Now, hold on. Here, I think I've got it. Okay, I want to join with everyone in thanking Stephanie and everyone else who's contributed to this event, and in congratulating us for continuing our activities despite the existence of a war. And of course, we all have in our hearts the soldiers who are not in an air-conditioned room. They are outside 24 hours a day in the heat, dodging bullets and trying to find hostages. According to Plato, Socrates, what? What should I do? Thank you, Stephanie. According to Plato, Socrates, Protagoras held that while all perceptions are equally true, some are better than others. It is better to perceive useful and good things, which I translate Christa, as just, rather than perceiving harmful and bad things, ponera, as just. In fact, perceiving things in a better way is not enough to make one wise. What makes one wise, according to Protagoras, is the ability to make others perceive what is good and useful as just and honorable. This means changing not merely their opinions, but the underlying disposition or hexis that causes these opinions. Plato's Protagoras claims that he can do this by means of words, just as a physician can alter someone's condition by means of drugs. This suggests that the hexis Protagoras would change is not a fundamental condition of character, as is the case for the Aristotelian hexis, since this would require extensive training to alter, if even possible, but something like what we would call an attitude, a relatively stable but not unalterable cognitive emotional disposition. In this paper, I argue that Xenophon's Socrates engages in the sophistic practice that Plato attributes to Protagoras. Although Xenophon does not use the word hexis to refer to a person's underlying emotional cognitive attitude, or the phrase dikaya kaikala that Plato uses to describe Protagoras' theory, the process seems to be very similar. His Socrates aimed not to win an argument or change an opinion, but to alter a deeper configuration of emotions and opinions as a means to changing a general attitude by making what is useful and good seem and be just and honorable. Xenophon's exemplary leaders, including both Socrates and Cyrus, try to convince others to adopt beneficial courses of action that initially seem wrong. In order to persuade them to adopt these courses of action, Socrates needs not only to convince them that they are beneficial, but also that they are morally acceptable. In other words, just and honorable. Socrates persuades Socrates that it is just and honorable to treat his older brother more respectfully. He persuades Aristarchus that it is just and honorable to ask his female relatives to earn money. He persuades Euthyphros that it is just and honorable to work as a supervisor for a wealthy estate owner, and he persuades Crito that it is just and honorable to ask Archidamus to serve him as a personal lawyer or fixer, and Archidamus that it is just and honorable for him to do so. Socrates also offers advice to Theodote on how to be more active in pursuing gentleman clients, which may have seemed an improper way to behave for a respectable hetaira. Cyrus persuades the Persians to abandon their traditional pacifism and adopt an aggressive foreign policy. In all these cases, the alteration of opinions about what is just and honorable is essential for the effort to persuade the person to adopt an attitude that makes possible action that is beneficial to all parties concerned. This kind of activity may be what stands behind the charge that Socrates taught people that all kinds of work are good. It seemed to some that Socrates was justifying selfish and disgraceful activities, in effect, identifying what is just and honorable with self-interest, in the manner that the Athenians charged the Spartans with doing in Thucydides. In fact, Socrates was teaching his associates their true interest, and for Socrates, that is always something that is in the interest of the other person as well. As Xenophon presents it, aligning one's sense of what is just and honorable with what is useful or beneficial does not mean encouraging injustice, but restoring psychic health. Like a modern psychologist, Xenophon's Socrates seeks to guide people away from destructive opinions and behaviors and lead them to beneficial practices by challenging their attitudes. Plato's Protagoras seems to see things in the same way. By drawing an analogy between the sophist and the physician, Plato's Protagoras suggests that he too thinks of the transformation of a mental hexis not as a cynical effort to justify injustice, but as a means of psychic cure or improvement. As I noted, this process is illustrated in many of the conversations in Memorabilia, but I will concentrate here on the conversation with his son, Lamprocles, in Memorabilia 2.2. Socrates approaches his son because he perceives that he is annoyed with his mother. As becomes clear, the situation is both painful and detrimental to the mutual benefit of the two parties. Socrates seeks to change his son's attitude and to improve the relationship by arousing Lamprocles' gratitude towards his mother. Gratitude is a complex of cognition, emotion, and behavior. It depends both on a belief that gratitude is just and on a recognition of the benefits that one has received and the efforts that another person has made. Socrates' argument depends on the fact that Lamprocles already believes that ingratitude is wrong. Here I'm trying to distinguish what I'm identifying as the Protagorean concept of hexis from the Aristotelian concept of hexis. Socrates seems to regard such principles as, Xenophon Socrates never attempts to, by words, to engrave such a fundamental principle on the souls of his interlocutors. He seems to regard such principles as fundamental traits of character that are not susceptible to alteration by mere words. Such principles can be implanted only by a process of habituation. Once he explains the benefits that Lamprocles' mother has provided to him and the suffering she has undergone on his behalf, Socrates counts on Lamprocles to respond with gratitude. Socrates does not begin by outlining the debts that Lamprocles owes to his mother, nor does he at any point in the argument take issue with his son's claim that his mother is extremely harsh. Her harshness was well known, as Socrates acknowledges elsewhere. Instead, he begins by attacking his son for being ungrateful, reminding him that ingratitude is a form of injustice. Lamprocles will not be able to adopt a better attitude unless he is first shamed out of his present attitude by an awareness of his own injustice. Along with this mortification, Socrates also seeks to erase Lamprocles' habitual attitude toward his mother by comparing her to a variety of other creatures, including animals and fellow passengers on a voyage. Lamprocles agrees that one must show gratitude to anyone who does a favor, whether a friend or an enemy. This creates an a fortiori argument that it would be unjust not to show gratitude for benefits provided by a mother, since no amount of enmity or mistreatment on her part would cancel the obligation of gratitude for the benefits she has provided. The focus on injustice reflects the same insight into the centrality of justice in determining attitudes that Protagoras expressed. In order to convict him of ingratitude toward his mother, and with it injustice, Socrates asks his son to consider debts to his mother that he has not previously considered. His argument that parents do an extraordinary benefaction by creating the child must not have been obvious to Xenophon's readers any more than it is to us. Ordinarily, a benefaction is something given to a person who already exists. If there was no recipient at the time of the benefaction, it is not obvious that any benefaction has taken place. But Socrates argues that the very act of bringing someone into existence is a benefit, and that it enables us to enjoy other benefits given by the gods. He cites the use of capital punishment as a deterrent to show that existence is the greatest benefit of all. It seems obvious that one would not be grateful to parents if one came into being against their will. But what if parents produce children simply as a byproduct of a desire for sexual relations? In that case, too, it would be hard to establish a bond of gratitude, since gratitude is a response to deliberate and intentional benefaction. Socrates hazards the theory that children are the products of deliberate decisions on the part of their parents. He supports this by noting that streets and houses are full of people who are willing to provide sexual satisfaction, and that men choose to marry women who will produce the best children. This may have been a more powerful consideration in ancient times than today, when some couples marry without any thought of having children, and others do not make it their main consideration. However that may be, it seems possible that Socrates is exaggerating the rational component in marriage. He presents parents as rational creatures who behave in accordance with the same rational principles that he himself endorses throughout Memorabilia. In any case, the presentation seems designed meta-theatrically to encourage Lamprocles to overcome his own misguided emotions and adopt a rational, beneficial attitude towards his mother. Parents deserve credit not only for producing the child, but also for raising it. Socrates emphasizes the pains and exertions that go into this effort by both father and mother, but especially by the mother. The mother cares for the child despite never having received any benefit from it. She is the initiator of a cycle of reciprocity. Xenophon says that she endures both kindunos and tonos, the identifying mark of great military men. But she is not purely altruistic in her behavior, although she offers her benefits not knowing whether or not she will receive any benefit in return. She hopes that she will. It was a common expectation that children would care for their parents in old age, and the Greeks could refer to a child as a geroboskos pais. Parents not only raise and feed their children, they also teach them whatever they can and provide others to teach them as well, so the children will turn out the best they possibly can. Socrates does not deny the parents' personal interest in having children. In fact, that personal interest is crucial for his argument that children should return the favors. These arguments aim at heightening Lamprocles' awareness of his own ingratitude and injustice, but they alone do not succeed in transforming him. Although he does not deny his debt to his mother, Lamprocles resists changing his attitude because of the practical implications of doing so. Despite all the benefits she has given, no one could tolerate her harshness. This argument is not strictly relevant, since Lamprocles has already agreed that mistreatment does not invalidate the obligation of gratitude. His words are crucially important, however, since he is explaining why he cannot recognize his debt to his mother, even if it is valid. Recognizing the debt would produce an obligation to tolerate what he finds intolerable. And by the power of cognitive dissonance, he resists accepting a conclusion that implies an obligation he cannot meet. In order to enable Lamprocles to recognize and accept his obligation of gratitude, therefore, Socrates needs to show him that his mother is not as intolerable as she seems. This he does by three arguments. First, he offers a broader perspective on Xanthippe's harshness, comparing her favorably to a wild beast on the grounds that she does not cause physical damage. Lamprocles replies that her words alone are unendurable. Socrates responds to this with two further arguments. First, that her harshness is balanced by Lamprocles' own troublesomeness as a child. And second, that he can easily ignore her words, as do actors on the stage. The fact that his mother's harshness is balanced by his own troublesomeness is crucial for enabling Lamprocles to accept Socrates' influence, because it implies that his mother is not in the wrong. That removes the shame that is associated with accepting mistreatment. Socrates has already argued that it is just for him to show gratitude to his mother. Now he argues that it is honorable and not shameful to do so. The second point is even more significant. In effect, Socrates demands that Lamprocles deny his normal relation to insulting or offensive words. This requires a detachment or distancing from his own habitual spontaneous reaction. Ignoring insulting words in a shame-oriented society, such as ancient Greece, where words were more damaging than sticks and stones, would be a particularly difficult demand. But on the other hand, the Greeks understood and respected the ability to show self-restraint, enkrateia or sophrosyne. This kind of detachment from emotions may have something in common with our conception of sociopathic behavior. But for Socrates, it is only the first stage in a process that leads to arousing the socially engaged and mutually beneficial emotion of gratitude. Lamprocles objects that actors on stage know that the other actors who castigate or insult them are not doing so with the intention of inflicting punishment or damage. Apparently, the intentions behind an insult are crucial for determining the amount of pain the insult will cause. Socrates is arguing not simply that Lamprocles' mother lacks intention to cause pain, as in the case of an actor, but that she has good intentions toward him. Knowing that her words spring from good intentions, Lamprocles will be able to accept them without distress. By this argument, Socrates provides Lamprocles with an insight that will enable him to adjust his reaction to his mother's words, which is much more than just changing an opinion. And by the way, this may be what Socrates himself, this may be the tactic that he himself used with his wife, as he says in the Symposium, that he married her in order to get used to abusive behavior. Once the objection has been overcome, Lamprocles will easily develop charis towards his mother, since he recognizes already the value of gratitude and apparently expresses it in other situations. This could be the end of the conversation. However, as frequently happens in Xenophon's Socratic conversations, after silencing his interlocutor, Socrates offers a new line of argumentation. He asks his son how he treats other people. Does he try to please no one? Does he refuse to obey generals and officers? He points out that it is worthwhile cultivating the goodwill of neighbors and traveling companions, if only for the sake of the advice or assistance they may offer. This shows Lamprocles both that it is worthwhile cultivating his mother's friendship and that he already possesses the capacity to befriend her. This capacity is part of his underlying character and does not need to be inculcated. Just as it is beneficial to cultivate cooperative relationships with neighbors and with traveling companions, so too can one benefit from a good relationship with one's own mother. Here, Socrates is arguing not for gratitude per se, which is why it is an addition to the conversation, but for a relationship of mutual benefit based on a cycle of benefaction. As in the comparison to an animal, so too here Socrates is disembedding his son's relationship with his mother, not from the economy, but from its place within the complex of ancient Greek social patterns, and trying to reestablish it on a rational basis. The relationship that Socrates promotes resembles an idealized pre-market relationship in which parents and children operate not on the basis of transaction, but on the basis of solidarity. The possibility of reviving a mythical pre-market form of social relations depends, however, on the hyper-rationalization of self-interest, a conscious awareness of the values of one's partners in filial relations, and on an understanding of how to motivate them to perform in mutually beneficial relations. Perhaps in order to counteract the impression that this disembedding is counter to Athenian norms, Socrates immediately adds that the state punishes citizens who show ingratitude towards their parents by disallowing them from public office. Despite his unconventional methods, Socrates is promoting an attitude that is identical to that of the city. At least that's what he claims. He concludes on the note he began by recommending that his son pray to the gods to forgive his ingratitude towards his mother. The intention of this comment is to exert further pressure to alter his son's attitude and thereby to make such prayers superfluous. In all these ways, Socrates goes beyond addressing any particular opinion and is attempting to influence a stable but alterable cognitive emotional disposition that contributes to action. He does this by attempting to erase some aspects of the current attitude, first by accusing his son of being unjust, and then by persuading him to detach from habitual spontaneous reactions, and finally by encouraging him to view his mother as a stranger. He builds a new attitude by demonstrating his son's debt to his mother and showing him the benefits of cooperating with her. I'm not sure that this is identical to what Protagoras was doing or what Plato attributed to Protagoras, but it seems to me that it's very similar and at least compatible with. Thank you.
Sometimes for discussion. There's something in the.
How do I get Socrates as my coacher?
I get someone too?
How do I get Socrates as my coacher?
Oh.
So this was
You just have to read Xenophon over and over and extrapolate.
Actually, I have a serious question. Can you find more about okay. I will start like this. Can you explain more about Plato's view on this point? How does he heard from Xenophon. Xenophon says that just by words I can change your axis, or let's say attitude or deep attitude to something, and then I can make you change, positive change in your life. What Plato would suggest should happen to reach the same effect?
That's an excellent question, and it really deserves a full investigation. My impression is that, well, in the middle and later dialogues, Socrates, Plato is focusing on the deeper habituation issues. He's maybe given up on the possibility that words alone can make a fundamental change in a person's hexis. But again, I think he's thinking of the hexis in a slightly different way from what Protagoras was talking about, more as the ethos, as a deeper personality quality. In the earlier dialogues, you could say that he's even more optimistic than Xenophon. I mean, Socrates seems to think he can convince people with arguments to change their opinions, because he doesn't recognize that these opinions are determined by sub-rational character traits. So I see Xenophon as kind of taking the middle ground in finding a middle object to address, not the deep hexis, but the slightly more superficial and alterable hexis. That is what I think that Protagoras is doing. That's my short answer.
So maybe I have a question. Would you say that so Socrates is convincing his son, and then the hexis changes? Does that make Socrates, does it show any adoption of cognitive reading of emotions in this case, or do you have, because you seem to imply that hexis is a mix of character traits and emotions. So you have something that is integral to the natural person, and it doesn't come from his view on the world. I'm not very clear in my question,
right,
but I'm interested to see if you think that there's some very strong cognitive feature of emotion in his attempt.
Absolutely, absolutely, there is. I mean, the way I'm looking at it is there's really three things. There's an opinion and an action that's sort of at the same level. That's a transient kind of an event-oriented issue. And then there's the deeper thing is the character, which is based on habituation. And Xenophon also recognizes that basic fundamental principles such as justice and gratitude, these need habituation, and these cannot be changed by mere words. And this is the whole point of Cyrus' failure to give a speech of exhortation to his troops prior to battle. This is not going to help. Words aren't going to make any difference at this point if they haven't been habituated for many years to prefer, the good over the bad. Then it's not, speech isn't going to make any difference. But in terms of this intermediate thing, this hexis, this kind of this hexis that I'm attributing to Protagoras, there's definitely a very cognitive component, and I mean, all of them is probably a cognitive component. But Socrates is definitely using that because he's bringing rational arguments to his son to explain to him that things that he didn't realize, aspects of the picture that he wasn't aware of, how much benefit his mother has given to him in the past. And once he has an intellectual awareness of that, together with the psychological and emotional pressures that Socrates exerts on him, then there's a chance that the hexis will change.
Yeah, Margalit.
I think it's convincing, but if Protagoras' methodology is that is a classical approach. So do you imply that Socrates is represented by Xenophon?
This is fantastic. This is my favorite question of all. Yeah, we talk about pre-Socratic, and I think when we talk about pre-Socratic, we actually mean pre-Platonic. Because the Socrates we're thinking about is Plato's Socrates. Now, if Xenophon accepted Plato's Socrates, then clearly he would not be, we should not consider him pre-Socratic. But he doesn't. He doesn't. I mean, what is the chance that he would be a thoroughgoing Platonist? That's almost inconceivable, and it's just factually not true. So what Xenophon is, in fact, representing the alternative to Plato, the alternative intellectual tradition to Plato. And yes, that was what we call sophistic. So, but again, we come to recognize that the sophists weren't as bad as Plato made them out to be. So I'm not saying this in a derogatory sense, but I just think, yes, he's much closer to the non-Platonic.
So Protagoras was a great educator. No question about it.
Absolutely. And even Socrates doesn't really accuse him of very bad things that he accuses some of the other sophists of. So there may be even a recognition by Plato that this is not such a bad approach.
Thank you. I was wondering, you think that the taxonomy of just here, where would you place matter of choice, like the Aristotelian biases, if at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, Aristotle does acknowledge that, choice is dependent on character. He's very clear about that. And then he goes through this difficult argument to try to claim that you're responsible for the character that you have, as though a 5-year-old kid is now responsible for having developed a character which now leads him in the wrong direction. I find it a weak argument. I mean, it's a wonderful effort to try to establish human responsibility, but it's not 100% persuasive in my opinion. Yeah, the character, and so people, I think, according to this view, and this is where he agrees in a way with Protagoras. People can't do things that do not seem to be true to them. And this is determined to a large extent by the hexis, and that is why the wise person is the one who's able to alter another person's hexis.
How would you then differentiate the action when you act outwardly from the choices you
Well, I guess I'm saying that they're interrelated and they can't be completely distinguished. I mean, people do in a theoretical way maybe have free choice about everything they do, but they don't have the reason to do the things that they should do because they don't have the understanding that would make that possible.
Is there any question from the internet?
can hear them.
צריך להיות בטוח שהכיפור הסאונד פתוח.
איך אני עושה את זה?
לא, אני אומר, הסאונד אצלי פתוח.
לא יודעת, כשניסינו בבוקר זה עבד, אבל עכשיו זה לא עבד.
We just have a comment, we don't have a question.
רגע.
Thank you, Mariana, for your support.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ricardo Gancz. Ricardo is a lecturer at University of Bologna and is working on emotions in Xenophon. And the title of his paper is Portrayals of Phobos in Memorabilia 3.5. Not 3.5? 3.5. Ah, yes. 3.5.
Okay, thank you very much. So before I begin, I want to share a very quick story. In the opening of the sessions, I've heard Professor Jonathan Price, Professor Lisa Morris talking about the universality of classics, and on this Shabbat, I happened to had a situation that I was invited to an event that was going to happen where I live. So I said, well, I can't go. So why? So yeah, I'm going to present a paper. And okay, what about it? I have some time. I would like to hear. Well, what are you going to present? So I give a summary to a friend of mine. He's way older than me, and he was really into it. That was possibly the first time he heard anything about Socrates. And at the end of the talk, he said, well, I have a story that I want to share with you. So I was in the war in 1982, the Lebanon War, and I was inside a tank, and out of a sudden, we felt a huge blow in the tank, and there was smoke coming out. So we just ran out. We got out of the tank, and the fear that I felt was something really strong. It made me alive and focused, and I managed to make my body go out of the tank in a way that I still can't understand how fast I did it. And afterwards, when we came back to the tank to see what exactly happened, we found that the tank was hit by an RPG. However, the RPG hit a very heavy metal box with very heavy tools, which melted, and it just became like a very heavy melted piece of iron. And he thought if the RPG had hit a little bit up, down to the side, I wouldn't be able to tell you this story. So, and my paper has everything to do with fear and also with hope. So, let me begin. Okay, so like other terms for emotions in ancient Greek, the word phobos can be used for a variety of distinct phenomena. It can refer to a habitual state of being afraid, or a fearful, a vivid, focused, transient state of fear, or even to a transient, generalized sense of unfocused dread. Xenophon's discussion of fear in Memorabilia 3.5 makes a distinction between the later two forms of fear. In Xenophon's view, while generalized dread is debilitating, an immediate and vivid sense of fear directed at a particular object can be useful for arousing a worthy response to the fear. The real challenge that Socrates faces is how to transform the generalized dread so that it can stimulate an effective response. Socrates is dealing with two instances of generalized dread. Pericles reports to him about the dread of the Athenians, and it turns out that he too is infected with a similar kind of dread. While the Athenians are in dread because of the prospect of an unsuccessful military conflict with the Boeotians, Pericles is in dread because the Athenian dread seems to have made them unable to respond effectively to the threat. In order to respond to both of these instances, Socrates analyzed the situation in detail. By this detailed analysis, Socrates forces Pericles to focus on the various sources of potential dread. By dispelling some of the causes of dread, Socrates forces Pericles to confront the real challenges that he faces in their particularity, and thus creates a more particularized object for the dread. This enables the dread to transform into vivid motivational fear. Another way of understanding this process is that by eliminating some of the causes for the generalized dread, Socrates raises in Pericles a buried hope. And once hope is aroused, along with it comes a more vivid and particular sense of fear, motivated by the potential for the hope to be thwarted. In any case, by leading Pericles through this process, Socrates gives him an experience of the transformation of dread into fear, and this will enable Pericles to provide the same process for the Athenians through in his charge. So that's the summary of what I'm going to present. So the episode begins with Socrates meeting young Pericles, who recently became a general. Upon meeting him, Socrates shows himself hopeful that Athens will now defeat its enemies, the Boeotians, and become famous once again in the art of war. But Pericles counters him, saying he cannot see how is that possible. You can see on the handouts number 1 how Socrates favorably compares the Athenians to the Boeotians, saying, 1, they are greater in number. 2, they have a greater number of well-developed men. They are more united. They possess higher qualities. They have a more glorious past. Pericles agrees with all the 5 elements brought by Socrates, but he retorts by painting a situation of contemporary gloom. Athens lost 2 wars. Their glory is low. The Boeotians' pride is exalted. Boeotians don't fear the Athenians and threaten to invade Attica. Athenians now fear the Boeotians. While Socrates has focused on non-emotional factors that favor Athens, Pericles focuses almost exclusively on the emotional states of the 2 parties. That signals that the discussion will be an effort to raise the Athenian spirits. Pericles describes the Athenians' Phobos as something hard to change, like a permanent mood. Socrates doesn't present a plan to eliminate this Phobos, but instead proceeds to establish that Phobos is not bad in itself, and even more, Phobos can actually be helpful. Socrates brings an example on how Phobos can be beneficial. So I am quoting here from the Memorabilia. I am aware of that, answers Socrates, but the disposition of our city is now more to a good ruler's liking, for confidence breed carelessness, slackness, disobedience. But fear makes men more attentive, more obedient, more amenable to discipline. This is the core of Socrates' argument. Phobos can be something positive if directed correctly. Socrates is telling Pericles that he does not need to worry about the Athenian Phobos of the Boeotians because Phobos can be useful for him as a general. And then Socrates illustrates it with an example of the sailors. I am quoting again. The behavior of the sailors is a case in point. So long as they have nothing to fear, they are, I believe, an unruly lot. But when they expect a storm or an attack, they not only carry out all orders, but watch in silence for the word of command like choristers. Socrates not only says that this fear is something that Pericles can benefit from, now that he's a general, he goes further and says that having the Athenians in this fearful mood makes Pericles' job easier than it would be if they were confident. Sailors, they need to function as a well-behaved and trained group. Since the sailors Socrates is describing are capable of doing this, they obviously have the potential to do so, and in this specific case, the Phobos is the catalyst to bring this potential into effect. When afraid, the sailors desire to listen to the orders that are given to them and to carry those orders as best as they can, since they see this as offering the best chance of getting out of the adversity alive. In Encyclopedia 1621, which I bring as number 2 in the handouts, Xenophon has Cambyses tell Cyrus that while compulsory obedience works,
the best path for obedience is when one obeys because it is in one's best interest to do so. He calls that willful obedience, as you can see on the handout. So one of the examples Cambyses brings are sailors at the sea obeying the captain. Socrates brought the example of the sailors to establish that Phobos can be useful and good because it creates this state of willing obedience. The question is, how then can Pericles use the general dread that possesses the Athenians as a tool for arousing willing obedience? So there is a striking difference between Socrates' example of the sailors and the current Athenian situation that Pericles has to deal with. The sailors, they can act disciplined because they have enough training and because the stimulus is sharp and vivid. Neither of which is the case for the Athenians. Furthermore, the sailors act disciplined because the skill and experience makes them hopeful they will achieve the desirable outcome, which mirrors what Aristotle says on Ethics 3.6 until 3.8. And this is the issue that Pericles raises. He accepts that fear may lead to willing obedience, but he cannot see how it may happen in the case of the Athenians' Phobos. Pericles has a good point. For the Aristotelian textbook kind of Phobos of the sailors is quite different from the mood-like Phobos of the Athenians, and besides, according to Pericles himself, the Athenian army is not currently well trained and thus not in a position to perform its duties as it should. So Pericles has a point. While the strong sense of fear stimulated by an easily identified object may be what the sailors need to behave with discipline, the Athenians are not in that position. Socrates brought the example of the sailors to show that Phobos did not paralyze them, but instead propels them to act. The Athenians' dread right now, however, has paralyzed them, is not leading them anywhere when it comes to the art of war. So Pericles needs to transform the generalized fear into something more focused that can cause an improvement on this behavior. So Socrates tells Pericles how he can make this transformation by giving, and the answer is by giving them hope. So Xenophon, Plato, and Aristotle, they connect hope with opinion and deliberation. Aristotle says in Rhetoric 2.5, and I quote, that one can only feel Phobos if there is some hope of salvation, and the sign of this is that Phobos makes one deliberate, and yet no one deliberates concerning things that are not hoped for. As a practical example, we have Xenophon Socrates saying that, and that's number 3 in the handouts, he who endures willingly enjoys his work because he is comforted by hope. Hunters, for example, toil gladly in hope of gain. Since the Athenians do not currently possess a good level of training like the sailors in Socrates' example, their opinions must be changed in such a way that they will have high enough hope that coupled with their fear will propel them to act. So first, by enduring hard work and training, and then to face the enemy. Accordingly, Socrates tells Pericles that first, he must make the Athenians long for restoring the former glory, and then make them desire to emulate those of the past, as well as men who mirror the characteristics of these men of the past. So he gives 4 pieces of practical advice for this emulation. 1, to find the custom of the ancients, to practice those ancient customs, to emulate those of today who are on top, and to practice the customs of those who are on top today. Once this plan is followed, the Athenians' general useless dread would be gone, and in the face of the Boeotians would become the good type of fear which, like the sailors, propelled them to act at the best. Socrates' plan owes a great deal to the fact that the Athenians dread the Boeotians, since in the account of this dread, it is easy to extract from them an admission that the current state of affairs is but a shadow of the glorious Athenian past. By doing so, Pericles can arouse in the Athenians a sense of longing for this lost past, which would naturally lead the Athenians to a state of willing obedience to Pericles. In order to further appreciate Socrates' strategy, we might consider what would happen if the Athenians were in this sorry state of affairs that Pericles describes, but they were not afraid of the Boeotians. If that were the case, the Athenians would most probably reject any kind of change because of a false sense of security. The general would have a harder time, and indeed, in Laws 863b, Plato says that confidence can lead to arrogance, which mirrors Xenophon Socrates saying to Pericles that confidence breeds carelessness. The fact that the Athenians have Phobos now, however, facilitates the accurate assessment of the situation, the desire for change, the willing obedience to the one who will guide the process of this change. The useless dread of the Boeotians would be useful in the hands of a skillful general. Once the general is able to vividly instill in the souls of the Athenians what they lost, the hope of recovering it, and the fact that right now they are in no position to do so, will change this general dread into a desire to engage in their training, to change their behavior, because they are aware, that is, they fear what they might lose, and they know now what should be done. This emotion is much more closer to the fear of the sailors who likewise are aware that they might lose their life, and they know what they should do in order not to die. So the conversation could have ended right here, since Pericles has now a blueprint of what to do. However, while he accepts Socrates' diagnosis and solution, he engages in a series of excuses. He says he can't see how the Athenians would be able to emulate good customs because they despise the elders, they mock those who train to become fit, they despise the rulers, and they bicker and fight with one another. So you can see on number 4 of the handout how once again Xenophon presents parallels in the discussion between Socrates and Pericles. And these are all very good objections. Although Socrates' plan sounds good, in practice, Pericles knows that the Athenians are a hard bunch and will not be able to be easily disciplined. But I think there is more to it. By presenting all these excuses, Pericles seemed to be asking Socrates for even more specifics on what should be done. Furthermore, after presenting the excuses, Pericles for the first time admits an emotion of his own. You can see number 5 of the handout. I quote, "So it comes about that mischief and evil grow apace in the city, enmity and mutual hatred spring up among the people, so that I am always dreading that some evil past bearing may befall the city." In order to comprehend Pericles' Phobos, we need to go back to the beginning of the conversation with Socrates, because there Socrates tells him, truthfully or not, we can discuss, that Socrates tells the following, that now that Pericles is the general, he has high hopes for him and for the future of Athens. So when Pericles described the situation of the Athenians, that they fear the Boeotians, he denied possessing this emotion. It is only when Socrates gave the map that Pericles can follow, only then Pericles described an emotion of his own. He says that he fears for the Athenians, and there is no reason not to take him on his word, but it goes beyond that. He is enacting his own fear. Then, when Socrates gave him a pathway to a successful generalship, Socrates changed his opinion that it was not possible And on the account of that, he gave Pericles hope that he can do it, and he can do it by becoming a competent general. At the moment Pericles understands he is the one to wear these shoes, his veiled dread of failing became sharper and more immediate fear. If Pericles fears for Athens, it means he also fears he is incapable of doing something to improve the situation. Pericles is not only afraid for Athens, he is also afraid to fail personally, because at the end of the day, Athens' military triumph or defeat is his responsibility and a reflection of his own success or failure as a general. At this point, we can see Socrates' solution to the Athenians' Phobos is also a mirror of his solution to Pericles. First, Pericles' Phobos is similar to the Athenian in the sense that both are not imminent but mood-like. Second, in Socrates' analysis, the Phobos of the Athenians put them in a good situation for Pericles to lead the Athenians to be better in the art of war, in the same way that Pericles' Phobos puts him in a good situation for Socrates to arouse in him a desire to be a better general. So once again, a parallel. And a third parallel is that the Athenians' dread must be used by Pericles to make them admit their own situation, to give them hope by showing them how a change is possible, and then to implement this change by guiding them to the correct training and discipline, which the Athenians, after having their opinions changed and instilled with hope, would gladly accept. Pericles, on the other hand, his dread was used by Socrates to make himself admit his own situation, only for Socrates to give him enough hope that a change is possible. And then at this precise point, when Pericles expresses an emotion of his own, then and only then Socrates will tell what he needs to do. Only when he has this hope. So Socrates says, well, I will tell you the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that the generals are the real cause of the soldiers' lack of discipline, because they are not prepared in the world of war, and most of them only improvise. Identifying the general cause, Socrates will move on to how Pericles indeed has the potential of being a successful general. He immediately dismisses the idea that Pericles is one of the improvisers by stating that he learned elements of strategy with his father and during his former experiences, and also what he doesn't know, he won't hesitate to ask those who have knowledge for guidance. Athenians and Pericles' Phobos are similar, and indeed there is a striking parallel on how the Phobos can be beneficial, as you can see on number 6 of the handouts. So this exchange confirms Pericles' willingness to accept Socrates' advice, and only after he learns this, Socrates is in a position to give a very practical military advice, which ends the conversation. The last piece of advice would allow Pericles to gain a seemingly easy victory and to boost both the armies and his own confidence. When this very practical advice is coupled with the strategy on how to change the body and the soul of the army, would have as an outcome the willing obedience of the army to Pericles. So by doing this change, so the army will have willing obedience to Pericles. And at the same time, by doing this successful action, Pericles would be more assured of himself as a general, and this will make Pericles in a state of willing obedience to Socrates. So the last table in the handouts summarize the different portrayals of fear in this passage. Thank you.
It was extremely clear.
Thank you.
The more I find it a little comment. This is a more complex, much more complex chapter than the one that I discussed. Because in the one I discussed, it was just a matter of changing, one specific quality. And here, he actually has to create the conditions for success. He has to persuading him not to go to war right now. If you just change your attitude, you can go to war. You have to change your attitude towards preparation for war, which means the fundamental conditions aren't yet there completely. Some of them are. He mentions that some of the conditions are there, but not enough to go to war. So this is a more complex chapter in here.
Yes, that's right. And also the way that he should use fear in order to be beneficial is very interesting. The way he used fear to transform in a positive way.
I don't want to be a party pooper, but hope is not always positive. But it is in, say, Pindar, but in other contexts, not. You mentioned the Athenians had hope, relying on hope, when they were stressed. It was true. When they actually went to cities where they had the upper hand and were all powerful, they, in the dialogue, expressed hope as a refuge pool. And a vein, an emotional vigilance and destruction. So don't rely on hope at all. And the Athenians decide to do so and are entirely obliterated by Athenians, but denounce hope as an emotion.
Yeah, well,
I'm just saying it all depends on
it depends on
it's not at all a completely positive value by literature. Some strategies like the brightness. It's also not so.
Yeah,
So useful.
both Aristotle and Plato, they point this out that hope can be very detrimental in a certain circumstance.
Yeah.
I mean, if they have hope that they can win, but they are totally unprepared, so this hope will be very destructive. On the other hand, the specific situation that Socrates is dealing is that they have this sort of fear that makes them paralyzed. So they need to overcome that. So the way Socrates found to make them overcome that is, well, first of all, remember your past, remember what you could achieve, remember what you have achieved, remember your potential. By remembering their potential, so this will arouse them a hope that it is possible. But then they need a guide. Okay, how can we restore that? We can restore that by engaging this specific regime of training, of good training, in the hands of a competent general. This should allow them to, the hope would be useful. At the end of the day, it can be destructive, it can be useful, will depend on the context, that's for sure.
It's always in doing politics, power politics, hope is usually what the weaker party survives from, not the strong from the party representative, party specialist. And you just discussed the rational rule, the ultimately irrational. Okay.
So you're showing that not only can fear be useful, even hope could be useful in certain
It can also be self-destructive.
Correct.
Yes, please.
And first, Socrates' first piece of advice is look for the customs we have, see what your ancestors accomplished. And indeed, national revival movements just all the time. Zionism was looking for, the ancient, the Third Reich, all those at the Third Reich. Remember, we had one time we believed the Holy Roman Empire. In many cases, including the two cases I gave, looking at the ancestors, we became a great source of civil disagreement about what was it about our ancestors that made them successful. But in the second semester too, if we only spoke the way they did, then we would be as good as that. We would conquer the world. I'm constantly quoting what Hugh Thomas says at the beginning of his book of the Spanish Civil War. Every nation that has once been great is forever scarred by the experience. I only mention this to indicate that first step he gives, look for the cause of the ancestors. He then provides a continued thing, a program, which way you should look at that, what you should do for that, etc. Each of which might have other people who would say, no, what they should. The thing, in order to look at the cause of the ancestors, what we need is Homer to sing about us or something. It's not a different thing, but Xenophon has worked this out much more programmatically to give what you can do with your example of the answer.
Yeah, and it is interesting that in the dialogue, Socrates will go from this general look for the concept of the ancestors and will end giving a very, very specific military advice on what they should do with their borders. So, and that was only allowed because of this willing, obedient state that he managed to create with Pericles.
I think that's an excellent moment when the first session and the first discussion of this morning. Thanks again to
We convene again at 12:25 here. Ah, on a dit, attends, je crois que...